Jane Parker, later known to history as Lady Rochford, was born around 1505 in Norfolk, England. At first glance, she might seem like just another noblewoman in King Henry VIII's Tudor court, someone who lived, served the crown, and died in a dangerous era. But her life was far from ordinary. Over nearly 4 decades, Jane's destiny became tangled with some of the most powerful figures of the time, earning her a reputation in popular lore as a schemer, a betrayer, and in many eyes, the architect of her own downfall. Modern historians, however, have begun to cast her in a different light. More tragic, more complex, and certainly more human than the caricature long believed. Her story speaks volumes about how precarious it was to navigate the Tudor court, particularly for a woman who had the misfortune to stand near the thrones of power when the axes fell. She was the daughter of Henry Parker, 10th Baron Morley, and Alice St. John, a family well connected in the aristocracy. Growing up, Jane would have received a good education for a girl of her rank, including lessons in reading, writing, music, manners. Everything deemed necessary to make her a suitable lady-in-waiting at court. Tudor England was a world obsessed with lineage and social status. The Parker family name alone ensured that Jane would one day enter royal service. Yet the idea that she would eventually witness the downfall of more than one queen and meet a violent fate herself would have seemed unimaginable during her early years in Norfolk. By her late teens or early 20s, Jane found herself on the path to marriage. Around 1524 or 1525, she wed George Boleyn, a man whose family was about to make waves that would rock the entire nation. George was the brother of Anne Boleyn and Mary Boleyn, 2 women who would become deeply entwined with Henry VIII. Mary was known for her affair with the king, and Anne, of course, would go on to marry Henry and become queen. George himself was intelligent, charming, and widely rumored to possess both ambition and a taste for the glamorous side of courtly life. Through him, Jane acquired the courtesy title of Lady Rochford, after George was made Viscount Rochford in 1529. Yet, almost from the beginning, their marriage was dogged by scandalous whispers. Some claim George was unfaithful. Others went as far as to speculate that he preferred the company of men, an explosive rumor in 16th century England, though historians today caution it's largely conjecture. What is clear is that the union was not a fairy tale romance. We can only guess at the private tensions that existed between them. In a court where gossip held as much currency as gold, it's possible that the relentless speculation itself introduced a toxic element into Jane's life. Nevertheless, Jane's service at court proceeded along a path that might have seemed ordinary for an aristocratic woman of her standing. She started off in the household of Queen Katherine of Aragon, Henry VIII's first wife. But the king's interest was increasingly turning toward Anne Boleyn, George's sister. By 1533, Henry had installed Anne as queen, an event that rocked the English religious and political landscape to its core. With Anne's rise, Jane found herself in a prominent position. She became a lady-in-waiting to her sister-in-law, the new queen. Imagine the swirl of courtly life at this time. A newly minted queen ascending to the throne, the old queen's supporters in near-constant protest, the king's counselors jockeying for position, and factions forming faster than one could keep track. Jane, as part of Anne's household, was in the epicenter of it all. The year 1536 proved catastrophic for the Boleyns. By this point, Henry VIII's affection for Anne Boleyn had soured. She had failed to produce a male heir, and the king's eyes were wandering again. When Anne was arrested on charges of adultery, witchcraft, and treason, it was only a matter of time before the web ensnared George Boleyn as well. The official indictment included the appalling accusation that George and Anne had committed incest. Modern scholarship generally views this charge as a grim tactic used by Henry's chief minister, Thomas Cromwell, to eliminate both Boleyn siblings and crush the faction that supported them. In the centuries since those events, the name Jane Parker, Lady Rochford, has often come up as the villain of the piece, the one who supposedly testified against Anne and George, weaving tales of incest to destroy them. It's a dramatic angle that's found its way into novels, films, and TV series, yet the evidence for Jane's direct betrayal is murky, at best. There's no surviving confession signed by Jane in which she denounces her husband or sister-in-law. Letters attributed to her suggest she might even have tried to help George during his imprisonment. Certainly not the behavior of a determined betrayer. Some historians propose that Thomas Cromwell manipulated or distorted statements from Jane and other witnesses, ensuring the outcome Henry VIII desired. The truth remains elusive, lost in the labyrinth of Tudor power plays and incomplete records. What we do know is that Anne Boleyn and George Boleyn both went to the scaffold in May of 1536, executed on Tower Green. Jane's husband was beheaded just 2 days before Anne. One can only imagine the personal anguish and fear Jane must have experienced, watching her family destroyed in such a public and gruesome fashion. That she survived at all is a testament to her ability to maneuver in a court that devoured the vulnerable. With George gone, Jane retained some form of widow's jointure, a financial settlement that allowed her not to be cast into total ruin. And remarkably, she managed to remain at court. The monarchy needed experienced ladies-in-waiting. After Anne Boleyn's death, Queen Jane Seymour, Henry's third wife, assumed the throne until her untimely demise in 1537. Jane Parker served her as well. Following Jane Seymour, Henry married Anne of Cleves, an awkward short-lived union that ended in annulment. Then came Katherine Howard, a vivacious teenager rumored to be everything the aging Henry wasn't, young, flirtatious, and brimming with life. Through each of these transitions, Jane Parker found a way to maintain her position, or at least avoid banishment. Henry's fifth wife, Katherine Howard, became Jane's next royal mistress. This is where Lady Rochford's story and downfall accelerates in dramatic fashion. Katherine Howard was not even 20 years old when she married Henry, who by then was well into middle age, heavier in build, and prone to irascible moods. Court gossip suggested the king had found a rose without a thorn, as he allegedly called Katherine, but behind her bright exterior lurked a dangerously naive approach to power. She soon embarked on a reckless affair with Thomas Culpeper, one of Henry's favored gentlemen of the Privy Chamber. In a place like the Tudor court, such a liaison was beyond perilous. It was potentially lethal. How exactly Jane Parker came to act as an intermediary between Katherine and Culpeper remains the subject of debate. Was she forced into it out of fear that defying the Queen would cost her position or her life? Did she do it out of loyalty or fondness for Katherine, who might have confided in her as a fellow member of the Queen's household? Or did Jane see some advantage in facilitating the affair? Perhaps imagining that forging a secret bond with Katherine and Culpeper would bring her closer to the new center of power. Some historians even speculate she was coerced by more powerful courtiers like Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, who sought to entrap Katherine and damage the Howard family. Regardless of her motives, Jane became deeply enmeshed in the clandestine meetings between Katherine and Culpeper, arranging, or at least enabling the couple's secret rendezvous. The affair came to a head in the summer and autumn of 1541, during a royal progress in the north of England. Katherine and Culpeper are believed to have met in Lincoln and Pontefract, while the king remained blissfully unaware. Tudor courtship was laced with danger under normal circumstances. Multiply that by 1,000 when the paramour is the Queen herself. Eventually, rumors and suspicious letters surfaced. Archbishop Cranmer, who had already overseen previous investigations into the king's wives, took charge of unmasking this new scandal. Letters between Katherine and Culpeper were seized. Confessions were coerced. Jane Parker found herself caught in the crosshairs, presumably singled out as the woman who made all these secret trysts possible. At first, Jane denied any involvement. But, as with so many Tudor inquisitions, the investigators had ways of prying out what they needed to hear. Under pressure, threats, perhaps physical intimidation, she confessed. She claimed she had only done what Katherine demanded of her, that the Queen was the instigator, and that she, Jane, was simply following orders. Yet by naming Katherine as the prime mover, Jane, in effect, admitted to facilitating treasonous behavior. If a queen's adultery or alleged adultery was treason, helping it happen was certainly treason too. In this environment, once a case of high treason gained momentum, guilt was almost a foregone conclusion. By November of 1541, Jane was arrested and sent to the Tower of London, the same grim fortress where her husband and Anne Boleyn had met their ends. Catherine Howard followed soon after, and so did Thomas Culpeper. Although Culpeper received a different form of punishment, he was executed in December. Katherine and Jane would share a final link in their destinies. The legal process that condemned them wasn't much of a trial by modern standards. It was more a parliamentary act of attainder. In other words, they were declared guilty by an act of Parliament that bypassed the usual judicial formalities. Henry VIII was determined to rid himself of another wife who had betrayed him. And for Lady Rochford, who had helped arrange that betrayal, or at least so the official narrative went, there would be no mercy. On February 13th, 1542, Catherine Howard was led out to Tower Green to be beheaded. Despite popular retellings that Catherine was unprepared, many accounts say she died with a measure of dignity, regretting her mistakes. Then came Jane Parker's turn. She was about 37 years old, an age where, by Tudor standards, a woman was considered past her prime, yet still full of life by modern reckoning. Witnesses later recorded that she approached the scaffold quietly. She asked those present to pray for her soul, admitted her faults, but in the typical style of the era, she refrained from publicly indicting anyone else. No grand conspiracies were unveiled by her final words. If she held secrets about who had truly orchestrated Catherine Howard's downfall, or details of her own role in the matter, she took them with her to the grave. The execution itself was swift. One detail that emerges from some accounts is that, unlike certain other botched beheadings of the era, Anne Boleyn's own execution was carefully handled by a skilled swordsman, but others were not so lucky. Jane's final moment came quickly. This might have been the only mercy extended to her. With her death, the Tudor court lost a figure who had, for nearly 2 decades, walked a tightrope between survival and scandal. She had escaped the wrath of the king after Anne and George Boleyn were put to death, only to be claimed by the same unstoppable machine of suspicion a few years later. Shortly after the executions of Catherine Howard and Jane, King Henry VIII enacted new legislation that made it treason to conceal the sexual behavior of a queen. The impetus was clear. The king wanted no repeats of the Catherine Howard affair. This new law, in a sense, was part of Jane's legacy, codifying the notion that helping a queen engage in or hide an affair would cost you your life. It was a final, chilling testament to the environment in which Jane Parker tried to navigate her way. In the centuries that followed, Lady Rochford has often been painted as an almost pantomime-level villain. In many accounts, she's the conniving wife who dooms her husband out of jealousy, or the manipulative lady-in-waiting who encourages a naive teenage queen to commit adultery, ensuring both their destruction. Works of fiction such as Philippa Gregory's The Other Boleyn Girl have popularized the idea of Jane's envy and malice, depicting her as the Boleyn family traitor. But modern historians who sift through surviving letters Legal documents and ambassadorial reports argue that the real story is far more nuanced. Her legacy then is one of caution, tragedy, and reflection. It reminds us that human lives are rarely as simple as the labels we attach to them. In the swirling court of Henry VIII, no one emerged unscathed if they lingered too close to the throne. Jane Parker, Lady Rochford, lingered too close and paid the ultimate price. Yet in the end, she remains more than just a historical footnote or a malicious cameo in someone else's story. She is undeniably one of the most enigmatic, controversial, and haunting figures of the Tudor age, a woman who, like so many others in that perilous court, walked the razor's edge of power and perished in its shadow.